Hi, my name's Chris. I work at a company called Assay Depot, and we use CouchDB as our data store. So I wanted to come here and talk a little bit about how we use Couch to do reporting, but that turns out to be way too big for lightning talk. So I want to talk a little bit about ways that you can think about your data and your queries that are more in line with MapReduce rather than with SQL. So the first thing I want to talk about is we are Ruby shops. We use CouchRest to integrate with CouchDB. You don't need to know too much about CouchRest other than that it's an ORM for CouchDB, and the CRUD in it works exactly the way you'd think it worked: create, get, delete, that sort of thing. The other interesting thing is that it's schemaless, so your models basically extend hash, and you can add attributes that aren't specifically declared in your model and save them at runtime, which is kind of nice for reporting. So once we have CouchRest and we can interact with CouchDB, we created an event model. Or an event object. And basically, anytime anything happens on the site, we write an event to the database. You can see here that we've defined, this should say name, but the event has a name, it has the email address of who performed the event, it's got a date and a time. And we also have refer and duration, but that's just to show that you can put whatever you want in there. We actually probably report on 20 or 30 things in production. So how do you create an event? Well, this probably looks pretty familiar if you've done any Rails programming. You create the event, you populate it. In this case, it's a purchase. We take the email from the user who's logged in. We've got the time, and then the rest of the stuff is populated as well. And then down here, you see the price, and that's one of those dynamic attributes. Since this is a purchase event, we throw in the price, even though it's not declared in the event model. And then we create the event. So that's all well and good, but what we really need to do is get that information out. So the way you query CouchDB is through MapReduce. And this is probably the simplest MapReduce function you're ever going to see. The function here basically looks at every document in the database and emits the email address that is in that document, and then the number 1, basically resulting in a big table of email addresses and ones. And down here you can see this is how you query that in CouchRest. This, for example, would give you all of the events that John performed. And then this we'll get into later, we'll skip over this really. That's just how you reduce it. So what's this look like? This is CouchDB's UI. It's a web UI. You can see our map functions in the left and our reduce functions in the right. And basically, we've just performed the map step, and you see email addresses on the left, the number 1's on the right. So we're all well and good so far. The next step is to reduce it. So if I go to the next one, we check this box over here, and I've gotten rid of some production data here. And what reduce does is it basically slams down all of the rows that have the same key, takes their associated values and puts them through the reduce function, and then emits that result. Since we're just summing, and we're emitting all 1s for the values, when we sum them, we see here that Kevin, who's my colleague, had 10 events in the database, and I, down here, had 1 event in the database. That's your basic reduce. So we're almost there. I just want to show a slightly more complicated key. One thing to know is that when you map things in CouchReduce, everything is sorted by the key. So in our example before, everything once you got to a certain person would be just jumbled. It wouldn't be sorted beyond that. So what we've done here is, in our map function, we've instantiated a JavaScript date object. We've pulled out the year, the month, and the day. And then the important part is, for our key, we're actually emitting an array where we have the event name, the year, the month, and the day, and that allows us to query ranges. So this query down here says find all the purchases starting in 2010, and then up through the end of 2010. So we'll get a sorted list of all of the purchases that occurred there. So just what does this look like? Well, here we see, again, we've reduced it. On the left, we have our keys, and we have the array just like we expect. So here we see that this is 0-based, so this is actually March 2nd. We had 59 events in the database. Here on March 1st, we had 152, and then going back, it was a little higher. The last thing that I want to show is this grouping value. So here we see that items are grouped exactly, which means it's checking the whole key and grouping and performing the reduce function on the entire key. We can actually adjust the granularity of our report here by reducing that to level 3, and now that says just look at the first 3 elements of the array, don't look at the whole array, and then that in this case has the effect of grouping by month instead of day, even though we haven't changed our map or our reduce function, we just changed the group level. And that's how we get data out of our database, out of CouchDB for reporting, and at that point we just mash it up using some other JavaScript APIs. Are there any questions?
What did you do there that I might find difficult with active record, say?
You wouldn't find any of this difficult with active record. We're using this because CouchDB is already in our stack, and we're using a lot of the, we're running multiple sites, and these events are being created on, well, right now it's 6 or 7 different sites, and then we're using Couch's replication to replicate them to a central reporting database. So that's the reason that we're using Couch. But I just thought the map reduce functionality and the way that you can manipulate the data is an interesting exercise.
I think something else you didn't really mention, but when you do reporting, everything gets compiled. So when you do a map and reduce, the index is basically being saved, and you only add the delta of the new entries. So if you're running a report every hour, you don't run the report on all the data you have in production. You only run on the latest delta that was added. So it's a big advantage when you have a lot of information and you do map reduce on that. You actually only do the reduce on the last piece of data. So if you were using a database and you had 10 million or 20 million records, it would be much slower to run a report like that. The other thing is the replication. You can actually very easily run a map reduce on the slave, which is not really a slave because in CouchDB there's no slaves, but you don't have to hit the production server for that.
That's a great point. And you can actually, while the reduce and the map are running and compiling the index, you can actually ask Couch what % complete it is, so you can provide like a nice status bar saying your report's being compiled, and once the view is complete, then you can show it.
Oh, and also it's not blocking. So in a database, in a traditional database, you would actually have a lock. So if you modify something, nobody else could access this information at the same time. But with CouchDB, you don't have that. How did you plot the information? Did you use a JavaScript API calling directly the database in CouchDB, or did you go through your application?
We went through the application. So we ran the report. We produced an HTML table, and then we have a JavaScript library that just goes through, pulls the data out of the HTML table, and puts it into various visualizations. All right. Well, thank you very much.